Think you know what a quiet new kid is capable of? Watch as he transforms relentless bullying into a breathtaking display of hidden strength, revealing a secret that will leave you speechless and change everything you thought you knew about resilience. Jaziel Washington stepped off the city bus on a chilly September morning, the early light casting long shadows on the cracked pavement of his new neighborhood. The urban landscape of Westbridge, with its faded murals and weathered brick buildings, had a story to tell, a tale of struggle and survival that Jaziel understood all too well. Today marked the beginning of a new chapter in his life, yet as he adjusted the straps of his worn backpack and took a deep, steadying breath, he felt the weight of both anticipation and uncertainty. Raised in a series of foster homes, Jaziel had learned early on that the world could be as unyielding as it was indifferent. His past was filled with fleeting moments of kindness and long stretches of isolation, and every step he took was accompanied by memories of whispered insults and the echo of doors closing behind him. Yet beneath his quiet exterior, hidden behind deep, thoughtful eyes, lay a strength that few would ever suspect, a strength forged in the relentless fires of hardship and endless determination. As he walked toward Westbridge High, the towering entrance of the school loomed ahead like a gateway to a world he hoped would be different from the one he had known. The campus was alive with the chatter of students, their voices overlapping in a noisy symphony that both excited and intimidated him. Jaziel's arrival did not go unnoticed. Some glances were curious, others dismissive, and a few even carried the sting of judgment. He could almost hear the unspoken commentary as he made his way through the crowded hallways, a mix of whispers about his unfamiliar accent, his quiet gait, and the intense focus that seemed to set him apart from his peers. In one particularly bustling corridor, a group of older students, led by a boy with an air of arrogant confidence named Tavian Browning, gathered near a row of lockers. Their eyes, sharp with youthful malice, scanned the new arrival as if measuring him for weaknesses. "Hey, new kid," Tavian sneered, his voice echoing off the walls, "you really think you can survive here without proving yourself?" The jeers that followed were cruel and relentless, designed to isolate and demean. Jaziel's heart pounded in his chest, but his face remained impassive. Every hurtful word only deepened the resolve he had painstakingly built over years of silent struggle. Despite the barrage of taunts, Jaziel found solace in the quiet corners of the school, the library, a secluded courtyard, and even the shadowed recesses of the art room. In those moments, he allowed himself to reflect on the countless hours spent training in a local community gym, where a dedicated mentor had taught him that true strength wasn't measured solely by brute force but by discipline, respect, and self-control. It was in those early morning sessions, under the dim lights of an empty gym, that he learned to channel his pain into a quiet power, a power he hoped would one day speak for itself when the time was right. The first day of school unfolded with an undercurrent of tension that Jaziel could not shake. Every classroom he entered, every corridor he traversed, seemed imbued with the potential for both hostility and unexpected kindness. Teachers offered him polite smiles that never quite reached their eyes, and classmates whispered in corners, their curiosity mingling with an inherent desire to belong. Yet for all the whispers and sneers, there was also an unspoken promise in the air, a promise that beneath the surface of mockery and isolation, Jaziel harbored an untold secret, a secret of relentless training, of inner resolve, and of a hidden strength that few would ever guess. By the end of the day, as the final bell rang and the corridors slowly emptied, Jaziel lingered on the steps of the school, staring out at the fading light. In the quiet dusk, with the cool wind ruffling his hair and the distant sounds of the city murmuring around him, he made a silent vow. No matter how harshly he was judged or how deeply the bullies' insults cut, he would not allow their cruelty to define him. Instead, he would let every painful moment fuel his transformation into something greater, a fighter not just in the physical sense, but in spirit, determination, and compassion. In that solitary moment, as the sky shifted to a tapestry of deep purples and blues, Jaziel realized that his journey was only just beginning. The path ahead promised challenges and adversity, but it also held the possibility of redemption, a chance to prove that what others saw as vulnerability was, in fact, the foundation of an unbreakable will. And so, with the distant city lights guiding his way and a heart brimming with secret resolve, Jazeel Washington stepped forward into the unknown, ready to face whatever awaited him in the crowded halls of Westbridge High. The second day at Westbridge High unfolded with an unsettling mixture of dread and determination for Jazeel. As the sun struggled to break through a veil of grey clouds, he entered the school with his head held high, yet the weight of yesterday's stinging whispers and mocking stares still clung to him like a persistent shadow. The corridors buzzed with the usual pre-class chatter, but now every glance seemed to carry a double meaning, curiosity mingled with derision. Though he had hoped that his quiet resilience might eventually earn him respect, he quickly discovered that the cruelty of youth was unyielding. Almost immediately upon reaching his locker, a group of older students, led by Tavian Browning and accompanied by a couple of his loyal followers, blocked his path. Their eyes burned with a mix of superiority and challenge as they circled around Jazeel like a pack of wolves. "So, you think you can just waltz in here and change everything?" Tavian sneered, his voice loud enough to silence nearby groups. The others joined in with a series of snide comments about his accent, his worn-out clothes, and even his quiet, thoughtful expression, which they mistook for weakness. Jazeel's heart pounded fiercely, each mocking syllable hammering at the armor he had so painstakingly built over years of solitary training. Yet, despite the barrage of insults, he maintained a composed exterior. Inside, however, a turbulent storm raged, a cocktail of fear, anger, and the burning desire to prove himself. Every harsh word reminded him of the cold nights in foster homes, of the countless times he had been dismissed and underestimated. But it also steeled him further, igniting a secret resolve that he had nurtured silently in the quiet hours before dawn. As the taunts escalated, one of the bullies shoved Jazeel roughly against a row of lockers. The impact rattled the metal, drawing gasps from a few nearby students who dared to witness the scene. For a split second, time seemed to slow. Jazeel's eyes flashed, not with the expected fury, but with a cold, calculated determination. In that instant, his body remembered every lesson he had learned in the dim light of the community gym. His muscles tensed, and he silently prepared himself for what might come next. Yet, even as adrenaline surged through his veins, a quiet voice in his head reminded him of his mentor's words: "Strength isn't just about fighting, it's about knowing when to stand your ground and when to choose peace." Before the situation could spiral further into violence, a teacher, Ms. Leora Fenwick, emerged from around the corner. Her presence, gentle yet commanding, interrupted the escalating confrontation. "That's enough," she said firmly, her eyes locking onto Tavian and his group. "Bullying is unacceptable. Everyone here deserves respect." Her intervention forced the bullies to reluctantly disperse, leaving Jazeel standing with his back still stinging from the shove. As Ms. Fenwick guided Jazeel to a quiet side corridor, where she gently inquired about his well-being, the whispers of the crowd gradually subsided into a murmur of uncertainty. Jazeel's voice, usually so reserved, broke with a mix of frustration and sorrow as he recounted the relentless taunts and the sting of humiliation. Ms. Fenwick listened intently, her expression softening with empathy. "I know it's hard," she said quietly, "but remember, your strength lies not in the punches you can throw, but in the dignity you carry." Her words, filled with quiet reassurance, planted a seed of hope in Jazeel's heart, a hope that perhaps there was more to his story than the cruelty he had endured. After class, while most students congregated in their usual cliques, Jazeel found himself drawn to the sanctuary of the library. There, among the rows of books and in the soft glow of reading lamps, he sought refuge from the day's harsh realities. The library, with its quiet corners and gentle rustling of pages, allowed him a moment to reflect on both the pain and the unexpected lessons of the day. He opened his well-worn notebook, its pages filled with sketches and notes from early morning training sessions, and began to write. With each word, he transformed the anger in hurt into a narrative of resilience, a narrative that, unbeknownst to him, was already beginning to resonate with others. As the final bell rang and the day drew to a close, Jazeel stepped out into the cool evening air, his thoughts a mix of unresolved bitterness and burgeoning determination. Every insult had stoked the flames of his resolve, every shove had reminded him of the power he harbored within. Though the cruelty of his peers had left a bitter taste in his mouth, it also fueled his promise to himself, to one day prove that the quiet new kid was not as fragile as he appeared, but a force to be reckoned with, a fighter whose strength was not solely measured by his ability to deliver blows, but by his capacity to rise above adversity and inspire change. Walking home beneath a sky smeared with the colors of dusk, Jazil's silhouette merged with the fading light, a symbol of both the hardships of the day and the unspoken promise of a brighter tomorrow. In that solitary moment, amid the hushed sounds of a city settling into night, he vowed that he would not let the cruelty of today define his future. Instead, he would harness every painful memory, every mocking word, and every bruising shove to forge a new identity, one marked by resilience, inner strength, and the quiet determination to overcome, no matter the cost. After that long, painful day of relentless taunts and cold dismissals, Jazil found himself alone once more as twilight deepened over Westbridge High. In the quiet aftermath, he slipped away from the noisy corridors into the sanctuary of the school's library, a dim, dusty refuge filled with whispered secrets of lives lived and lessons learned. Seated at a secluded table near a window, he opened his worn notebook and began to write furiously. His pen raced across the paper as he poured out the raw emotions of the day, the sting of sneers, the bitter taste of isolation, and the simmering resolve that refused to be extinguished. Each word he wrote was a defiant promise to himself, a vow that the cruelty he endured would not define him, but instead become the fuel for an inner strength he was determined to forge. In the solitude of that quiet space, memories of long, early morning training sessions with his mentor, Ezekiel Lockwood, resurfaced. He recalled the echo of punching bags in the nearly empty gym, the rhythmic thuds that punctuated the silence of his determination. Those moments had taught him that every blow absorbed was a lesson in resilience and every drop of sweat was a step toward reclaiming his dignity. As he reread his scribbled notes, sketches of techniques, motivational quotes, and even fragments of his own personal philosophy, Jazil realized that he was at a crossroads. The cruelty of his peers had reopened old wounds, yet it also reminded him of the strength he'd cultivated in secret. The ink on the paper became his battle cry, a declaration that he would not let their hateful words shatter the foundation of his inner resolve. That night, as the library's lights dimmed and the murmurs of distant voices gave way to silence, Jazil decided to take a solitary walk through the rain-slicked streets. Under the sparse glow of streetlights, he allowed himself to confront the painful truths of his past, each raindrop washing away the bitterness of the day, leaving behind a raw, reflective calm. In the quiet of the night, the images of sneering faces and harsh insults mingled with the comforting memories of his mentor's steady guidance. He recognized that the journey to transforming pain into power was not immediate, it was a gradual process of introspection, self-acceptance, and relentless practice. As he meandered along the empty sidewalks, his mind churned with determination. He vowed to seek out every opportunity to refine his skills, both physical and emotional, and to stand not as a victim of cruelty but as a beacon of resilience. The pain he felt was deep, yet it also carried within it the promise of metamorphosis. In that quiet, rain-soaked hour, Jazil resolved that his next steps would be guided by the lessons of the past, the strength of his training, and a steadfast belief that he could turn every insult into an impetus for change. Though the shadows of bullying still lurked in the corners of his world, they would no longer hold him captive. Instead, they would serve as reminders that even in darkness, the smallest light could ignite a revolution of inner strength and hope. The next day dawned cool and clear, a welcome change from the overcast gloom that had marked the previous few days. As Jazil made his way to school, his mind was still swirling with the emotions of the night before, the quiet revelations he had gathered during his solitary walk through rain-slicked streets, the weight of painful memories, and the spark of determination that now began to kindle within him. Every step he took on the familiar pavement was measured and deliberate, as though he were pacing himself for a long journey that had only just begun. Upon entering the building, the corridors of Westbridge High seemed to have transformed overnight. The usual murmur of chatter was replaced by a gentle undercurrent of curiosity and change. While some faces still carried traces of judgment from his arrival, others, perhaps touched by the evolving atmosphere, now looked at him with a glimmer of respect or even silent support. Jeziel moved through these halls with a renewed sense of purpose, each smile, however fleeting, reinforcing the inner promise he had made to himself, that he would not let the cruelty of the past define him. In class, as teachers began the day's lessons, Jeziel's thoughts wandered between the textbooks and the echoes of his own internal dialogue. He recalled the long hours spent at the community gym and the wise, patient words of his mentor, Ezekiel Lockwood. Ezekiel had once told him, "Strength is not just the power to fight, but the courage to choose when to fight and when to rise above." Those words now resonated with a newfound clarity as he took notes, his pen moving steadily as he absorbed not only the lesson on algebra but also the silent lesson of self-discipline and self-respect that he had cultivated in the shadows of his struggles. At lunch, instead of retreating into the quiet solitude he had come to know, Jeziel found himself drawn toward a small table in the far corner of the cafeteria, a place that had gradually become his sanctuary. There, he observed a new development, a group of students huddled together, discussing something in hushed, earnest tones. Their conversation was laced with uncertainty and hope, as if they too were grappling with the complexities of the school's social landscape. Among them was Roderick, a slight boy with earnest eyes, whose earlier act of vulnerability had begun to ripple through the student body. Roderick's soft-spoken reflections on his own past teasing and regrets had sparked a subtle change, and now the group was quietly planning a student-led initiative to address bullying and foster a culture of empathy. Moved by their determination, Jeziel hesitated for a moment before summoning the courage to approach them. His heart pounded as he stepped into the circle, his presence both unexpected and, for the first time, welcomed. "I've been through a lot," he began, his voice steady despite the lingering tremor of emotion, "and I know what it feels like to be pushed aside. Maybe together, we can create something better, a place where no one is left to suffer in silence." His words, simple yet imbued with sincerity, resonated deeply, and one by one, the other students nodded in agreement. That lunchtime encounter, marked by shared stories and the tentative formation of a supportive network, was the first concrete step toward transforming the hostile environment into one where hope and mutual respect could flourish. Later that day, as classes resumed and the final bell neared, an unexpected incident unfolded in the school's courtyard. A younger student, visibly distressed and trembling, was cornered by a couple of older kids whose sneers and jeers threatened to escalate into physical harm. The scene, charged with imminent danger, brought a murmur of alarm from nearby onlookers. For a split second, the memory of the bullying Jeziel had endured flashed in his mind, igniting an inner resolve. He rushed forward, not with a violent outburst but with measured determination. Drawing on the discipline he had honed through months of relentless training, he intervened calmly, stepping between the aggressors and the frightened child. "Enough," he said firmly, his voice cutting through the tension like a clarion call. His eyes, dark and unwavering, locked onto the bullies, conveying a message that was both a warning and a plea for mercy. The aggressors, momentarily taken aback by the unexpected confrontation from the quiet new kid, hesitated. In that pause, the surrounding students rallied around Jeziel and the distressed child, their collective presence forming a barrier against further cruelty. With the intervention of a vigilant teacher who quickly arrived on the scene, the situation was diffused, leaving behind a lingering silence filled with a mix of relief and newfound solidarity. After the incident, as the crowd dispersed and whispers of admiration mingled with cautious optimism, Jeziel retreated to a secluded spot in the courtyard, a quiet area beneath an ancient oak tree that had witnessed countless seasons of change. Sitting there, he allowed himself a moment to process what had just transpired. The adrenaline of the confrontation slowly ebbed away, leaving in its wake a profound realization: his strength, carefully cultivated in the crucible of hardship, could be a beacon for others. It was not merely the physical ability to protect himself or others, but the quiet moral fortitude to stand up against injustice, even when the odds were stacked against him. That evening, as twilight descended and the sky turned a deep, velvety blue, Jeziel sat in the dim glow of a street lamp outside the school. His mind replayed the events of the day, the supportive smiles from his peers, the first tentative steps toward a movement of unity, and the intense, heart-pounding moment of intervention. Each recollection reinforced the belief that every act of courage, however small, could ripple outward to change the world around him. In that quiet moment of reflection, he resolved that he would not let the scars of the past dictate the course of his future. Instead, he would use every experience, both painful and uplifting, to forge a path toward a community defined by resilience, compassion, and genuine support. As the night deepened, Jeziel stood and began his slow walk home, the cool breeze carrying away the remnants of the day's tension and leaving behind a promise of a better tomorrow. In his heart, he knew that while the road ahead might still be fraught with challenges, he had taken the first steps toward transforming not only his own life but also the very culture of Westbridge High. The echoes of hostility were gradually giving way to the soft, steady beat of unity, a melody that Jeziel vowed to nurture until it could drown out every note of cruelty. Jeziel's days grew increasingly charged with tension, and whispers of his past confrontation spread like wildfire through Westbridge High. What had begun as isolated incidents of bullying had escalated into an undercurrent of rivalry and resentment among a group of older students. Late one crisp afternoon, as the final bell rang and students poured out onto the campus, a notorious clique led by Tavian Browning and his cronies assembled near the empty parking lot, a place known for its shadowy corners and solitude after school hours. As the group circled, their eyes glinting with a mix of malice and a desperate need to reclaim their former dominance, Jeziel found himself suddenly surrounded. Their voices, low but laced with venom, taunted him once more. "Think you're untouchable now, new kid?" Tavian sneered, stepping forward with an air of arrogant challenge. The atmosphere crackled with hostility as the bullies closed in, determined to prove that no one could rise above their cruelty. Without warning, the tension exploded into violence. One of the bullies lunged with a wild swing, and in a heartbeat, the air filled with the sound of rapid, controlled movement. Jeziel's body moved like water, fluid, precise, and unyielding. Every lesson from his early morning training sessions with his mentor, Ezekiel Lockwood, came flooding back as he deftly parried clumsy punches and delivered a series of swift, measured strikes. In a matter of moments that felt both eternal and instantaneous, the quiet new kid transformed into a formidable fighter. The bullies, caught completely off guard by the raw power and discipline he exhibited, staggered backward. Cries of shock replaced the earlier jeers as several of them found themselves disarmed not only physically but in spirit. But as the final blow landed and the last bully crumpled to the ground, an unexpected stillness settled over the scene. In that charged moment, with adrenaline still coursing through his veins, Jeziel paused. His eyes scanned the fallen figures, and instead of seizing the opportunity to exact further revenge, he took a step forward and extended his hand to the one who lay trembling on the pavement. "Get up," he said softly, his voice steady but laced with a deep, unexpected compassion. "This isn't about hurt, it's about healing." The transformation was immediate. The bullies' faces shifted from fury to confusion, and even Tavian's sneer faltered as he stared at Jeziel, at the fighter who could have easily continued the vicious cycle, yet instead chose to offer a path away from further pain. Nearby students and teachers, who had witnessed the confrontation in stunned silence, began to murmur. What had initially been seen as a display of brute strength now resonated as a powerful act of restraint and empathy. Later that evening, as the cool air settled over the quiet schoolyard and the remnants of the struggle lay scattered like broken echoes, Jeziel retreated to a secluded spot beneath an ancient oak tree. There, in the fading light, he allowed himself a moment of introspection. The adrenaline had faded, and in its place was a profound realization: his strength was not solely in the physical blows he could deliver but in the courage to break a cycle of hatred and retaliation. Every insult and every painful memory now fueled a quiet determination to forge a future defined by resilience and compassion rather than bitterness. In the days that followed, the ripple effects of that afternoon began to reshape Westbridge High. Teachers and administrators, stirred by the incident, organized workshops on empathy and conflict resolution, while students, emboldened by Jeziel's unexpected mercy, started speaking up against bullying. Even those who had once tormented him began to show signs of regret, and whispered conversations of reconciliation spread among the corridors. For Jazeel, the confrontation marked a turning point in his journey. It was a painful yet liberating moment, one that revealed the depth of his hidden strength and the transformative power of choosing compassion over cruelty. As he walked home under the soft glow of streetlights that night, he carried with him not just the scars of the fight, but a new, unshakable resolve. He vowed that every painful memory and every mocking laugh would be transformed into fuel for creating a better future, not just for himself, but for everyone who had ever felt powerless. In that long, unforgettable afternoon, Jazeel Washington had discovered that true strength lay in the ability to forgive and uplift, forging a path toward healing that would forever redefine his destiny. After the tumultuous events of that fateful afternoon, the atmosphere at Westbridge High began to shift in subtle yet undeniable ways. The echoes of that confrontation lingered in every corner of the school, a constant reminder that the quiet new kid was far more than he appeared. In the days that followed, the corridors buzzed with whispered conversations and tentative glances. Some students, who once joined in the jeers, now exchanged knowing looks, as if they realized that the cruelty they once inflicted had a price. Even Tavian Browning, whose sneers had once led the charge, now kept his head down, his usual bravado noticeably diminished. Jazeel, though still bearing the emotional scars of relentless bullying, sensed that his act of restraint and compassion had sown the seeds of change. Each morning, as he stepped through the heavy double doors of Westbridge High, he noticed that even the teacher's eyes held a quieter, more empathetic glimmer. In class, his peers' behavior had subtly transformed, from dismissive whispers to curious, respectful nods. During lunch, a few of those who had once laughed at him now quietly sat with him, offering words of encouragement or simply sharing the silence of a newfound understanding. One chilly morning, as Jazeel settled at his usual spot by the window in the nearly empty library, Ms. Leora Fenwick, his favorite teacher, approached him with a gentle smile. "I saw what happened," she said softly, as if careful not to disturb the fragile peace. "I want you to know that what you did, stepping in with that compassion, it changed something here. Not just for you, but for all of us." Her words, sincere and unhurried, filled him with a warmth that contrasted sharply with the lingering bitterness of the past. Jazeel's heart, still tender from the echoes of abuse, beat a little steadier as he listened. He realized that his inner strength was now not only a shield for himself but a beacon for others struggling in silence. Over the following weeks, the administration began to take notice of the shifting dynamics. The principal, concerned by the growing unrest that bullying had sown in the school, organized a series of open forums. In these meetings, students were encouraged to share their stories and propose ways to create a more inclusive environment. During one such session in a spacious, sunlit auditorium, a timid voice from the back stood up, a student who had once been one of the bullies, and admitted that he had long hidden his own pain behind mockery. His confession, raw and unfiltered, sparked a chain reaction. More students began to speak, revealing that beneath the masks of cruelty lay insecurities, fears, and unhealed wounds. The conversation that day wasn't just about condemning bullying, it was a cathartic journey where both victims and perpetrators acknowledged the complexity of their emotions. Jazeel, too, was invited to speak. Standing before an attentive audience of peers and teachers, he recounted not only the pain he had suffered but also the transformative power of discipline and compassion. "I used to think that being quiet meant I was weak," he confessed, his voice steady and clear. "But strength isn't just about fighting back, it's about knowing when to stand up and when to reach out." His words, resonating with the sincerity of lived experience, ignited a spark of hope that quickly spread throughout the auditorium. For many in that room, it was a revelation, a moment when the cycle of bullying was broken by the simple truth that empathy could heal even the deepest wounds. Beyond the school walls, the effects of that day rippled into the community. Local newspapers ran stories about the unexpected transformation at Westbridge High, and community leaders began to champion new programs aimed at fostering understanding among youth. Jazeel found himself approached by volunteers and mentors from neighborhood centers, all eager to support him and to learn from his experience. He began to participate in after-school workshops on conflict resolution, where his calm and measured responses became a model for others. Gradually, what had once been a culture of isolation and cruelty began to give way to a community-driven effort to repair old wounds and build new bridges. In the quiet solitude of the library, on another rainy afternoon reminiscent of the day that had changed everything, Jeziel opened his journal and began to write. Each word was a testament to the long journey from darkness to light, a narrative woven with pain, redemption, and the promise of renewal. He wrote about the sting of harsh words and the silent strength that had carried him through, about the unexpected kindness of a teacher and the vulnerability of a former bully who had found the courage to confess his own pain. As his pen danced across the paper, he felt that each sentence was a step toward healing, a building block in the creation of a new legacy, a legacy that was not defined by past hurts, but by the power to rise above them. And so, as the days turned slowly into weeks, Jeziel Washington began to realize that his story was no longer just his own. It was a story shared by many, a narrative of resilience in the face of cruelty, of finding light in the midst of darkness, and of the transformative power of empathy. The quiet new kid who had once been the target of relentless bullying was now emerging as a silent leader, a beacon for those who had long suffered in silence. In the soft murmur of a community coming together, in the gentle hum of new beginnings, Jeziel's resolve grew stronger. The future was uncertain, the scars of the past deep, but each step he took was a declaration, that no matter how painful the journey, hope could and would prevail, one compassionate act at a time. In the weeks that followed the tumultuous incident, a profound transformation began to ripple through Westbridge High. The corridors, once echoing with derision and whispered jeers, now buzzed with tentative conversations and quiet acts of solidarity. Jeziel found that the shock of that fateful afternoon had not only changed his own outlook but had also kindled a slow, steady evolution in the attitudes of his peers. Students who had once joined in the bullying now exchanged hesitant, apologetic glances. Even Tavian Browning, the ringleader of the tormentors, began to shrink into silence, his usual bravado replaced by a haunted uncertainty. Every day, as the final bell rang and the building emptied, remnants of hostility softened into reflective murmurs, whispers of change that hinted at a budding community ready to challenge the old ways. One crisp morning, during an unscheduled school assembly called by the principal, a group of students gathered in the auditorium to address the issue of bullying head-on. The assembly was not a typical lecture, but a heartfelt forum where victims, former bullies, and bystanders alike were invited to share their experiences and hopes for a better future. Jeziel, standing near the front with his heart pounding, listened as his peers bravely recounted the pain inflicted by thoughtless cruelty and the unexpected strength that emerged from it. In a particularly poignant moment, a previously silent student, Roderick, stepped forward and admitted how he had once ridiculed others to hide his own insecurities. His confession stirred a collective gasp from the audience, and for the first time, even those who had once been agents of cruelty began to confront the possibility of change. The atmosphere was electric with raw honesty, a shared vulnerability that united the students in their common struggle for acceptance and healing. Following the assembly, the school administration launched a series of initiatives aimed at fostering a more inclusive and supportive environment. Peer mediation groups, led by compassionate students and guided by counselors, began to meet regularly. Jeziel found himself not only welcomed into these circles but also looked up to as a quiet leader, a beacon whose experience had taught him that true strength lay in empathy and understanding. Over several weeks, he helped organize creative workshops and discussion panels where students explored their feelings through art, writing, and open dialogue. In these sessions, the walls of the once hostile environment slowly crumbled, replaced by bridges of shared experiences and newfound friendships. Teachers observed that even the most skeptical students began to see beyond the surface, discovering that every hurtful word could be transformed into a lesson of resilience. As the semester drew to a close, the transformation was undeniable. The legacy of that brutal confrontation had evolved into a quiet revolution, a school culture that not only condemned bullying but actively celebrated compassion. Jeziel, whose journey from the isolated new kid to a symbol of hope had galvanized the entire community, stood as living proof that every scar could be mended with courage and understanding. In the final days before summer break, as the halls buzzed with excited chatter about upcoming changes and new beginnings, Jaziel sat in the library and penned his thoughts in a worn leather journal. He wrote about the long, painful road that had led him here and the unlikely allies who had helped him reclaim his dignity. Each word was a testament to the transformative power of empathy, a promise that, even in the darkest corridors of cruelty, the light of compassion could spark a revolution of healing. As summer approached, the once harsh corridors of Westbridge High transformed into a vibrant stage of renewal and hope. Jaziel, who had once been defined by sneers and isolation, now found himself at the center of a community reawakening, a transformation that began with a single act of restraint and compassion, and grew into a quiet revolution that rippled through every classroom and hallway. In those final weeks before summer break, the atmosphere was electric with the promise of change. Where whispers of cruelty had once reigned, now there were conversations about healing, acceptance, and the power of standing together. On a warm afternoon, as sunlight poured through the large, arched windows of the newly renovated auditorium, the school organized a celebratory assembly to honor the strides they had made in transforming their culture. The event was more than a simple farewell before the long summer. It was a declaration that the spirit of unity had taken root in a place once ruled by division. Teachers, students, and even previously antagonistic voices gathered to share their stories of struggle and triumph, and to recognize that every individual had the capacity to change. The principal, with genuine warmth in her eyes, spoke of how the school had reformed its policies, introduced peer mediation programs, and provided resources for conflict resolution. She recounted the transformative impact of a brave student who had not only fought off bullies but had shown mercy, inspiring a dialogue that challenged old prejudices and paved the way for new beginnings. Jaziel was invited to take the stage, a moment that filled him with both awe and quiet pride. Standing before a sea of faces that now looked at him with respect rather than ridicule, he recounted his journey with a measured tone that conveyed both pain and resilience. He spoke of lonely nights spent on rain-slicked streets, of the bitter sting of insults that once made him feel invisible, and of the hidden strength he had honed in the quiet hours before dawn. Yet, as he spoke, his voice grew stronger with each word of his hard-won wisdom, transforming personal agony into a message of empowerment. His story was interwoven with moments of unexpected kindness, a teacher's gentle smile, a former bully's remorseful apology, and the steady support of a mentor who had believed in him when no one else did. Every word he uttered resonated deeply with those who had once felt marginalized and ignored, sparking a sense of shared hope. After his speech, the auditorium erupted in applause, a sound that carried with it the promise of a future where cruelty was replaced by compassion and where every student's voice was valued. Outside, under a sky that shimmered with the golden hues of a fading summer day, community members gathered in the school's courtyard. In a spontaneous celebration of unity, students painted a mural on a blank wall, a vibrant tapestry of images symbolizing resilience, growth, and renewal. The mural depicted a phoenix rising from smoldering ashes, intertwined with images of helping hands and smiling faces, encapsulating the transformation that had taken root in the hearts of everyone at Westbridge High. In the weeks that followed, the impact of that pivotal day rippled far beyond the school's boundaries. Local newspapers ran stories about the remarkable turnaround at Westbridge, and community leaders launched initiatives to further support youth empowerment and mental health. Jaziel's own transformation became a rallying cry, a symbol that no matter how painful one's past may be, it could be rewritten through courage, empathy, and the relentless pursuit of hope. He found himself mentoring younger students, guiding them through their own struggles, and even collaborating with local artists and counselors to create programs that fostered a more inclusive and nurturing environment. As summer settled in, casting long, warm evenings over the rejuvenated school grounds, Jaziel often reflected on the journey that had brought him to this moment. He realized that every bitter word and every bruising encounter had, in its own way, prepared him for the day when he would step forward not as a victim, but as a beacon of change. His scars, once symbols of his isolation, had become emblems of his resilience, proof that through adversity, one could discover an inner strength capable of transforming not only a personal destiny but the very fabric of a community. And so, as the final day of the school year came to a close, with the laughter of newly formed friendships and the gentle murmur of promises for the future filling the air, Jazeel Washington stepped out into the twilight with his head held high and his heart brimming with hope. The transformation of Westbridge High was complete, a metamorphosis born from the ashes of cruelty and nurtured by the quiet power of compassion. In that radiant, enduring moment, the promise of a brighter tomorrow shone unmistakably, that every wound, no matter how deep, could heal, and that even the most isolated souls had the potential to ignite a revolution of love and unity. In my view, the ending of this story is a powerful affirmation of the human spirit's capacity for transformation. Jazeel's journey, from a tormented, isolated new kid to a beacon of resilience and hope, illustrates that true strength lies not in physical might or revenge, but in the courage to rise above cruelty with compassion. His evolution inspires not only personal healing but also ignites a broader change within his community. The story's conclusion is not just a triumph over adversity, it's a call for empathy and understanding, reminding us that every painful experience holds the potential to spark positive change when met with forgiveness and unity. Ultimately, the ending leaves us with a timeless message, that even in the face of relentless bullying and isolation, one determined heart can transform darkness into a future filled with hope and connection.